Hello, Garland Nixon here, and Canada's caught in a mess, but it exposes something very, very important that we need to discuss. Let's talk. Good morning, Garland here, and let's talk about Canada. So I'm sure by now, if you're living anywhere on the face of the earth and various other planets, I'm sure you've heard about what happened in Canada. And I think it's interesting, really, really interesting, because it exposes something. I'll get right to the point. A while back, Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria, gave a speech. And in this speech, what he said was interesting. And I'll put it like this. Let me put it like this. I like to discuss things in this context. I've talked about the issue of lying before, about the neocons and lying, right? And basically, they're not per se liars. They are apathetic about the truth, right? What am I mean? What do I mean? That means a liar. I've known people, I'm sure you have too. I've known people in my life that, as LBJ said, would rather climb a tree and tell a lie than stand on the ground and tell the truth. You know, people that you could ask them, people that were pathological liars, people that you could ask them a question that they had nothing to gain from, a question that they were obviously going to be found out almost immediately if they lied, and they couldn't help themselves. They lie anyway, right? People who are just, that's their chosen profession. And I'm sure we've all known people like that, right? So those are people who lying to them is what they do. Lying is at the forefront of their life and existence. Then you have the neocons who are apathetic about lie. What does that mean? That means that they don't lie just to be lying. They're lying for a purpose. So, as I put it, if in fact it benefits them, they'll tell a lie. If it benefits them to tell the truth, they'll tell the truth. In fact, in some instances, what they'll say will be true, but they'll put a false context on it. They'll leave certain things out. They'll lie by omission. They'll lie by commission, right? They'll do whatever they need to do to manipulate language to get the end outcome that they want. So language for these people is not used to communicate their thoughts. Language is used to manipulate and get them to an outcome, right? They will lie, they will cheat, they will steal, but they'll also tell the truth. Or they'll say, you know, we've seen this during this censorship debacle that we've been dealing with, starting, you know, really, to me, the big time we really saw it was COVID. We've been dealing with lies for a long time, including you know, certainly wars, etc. But with COVID, we went from the government just lying to saying, hey, you can't talk about things that we don't think you should be talking about, right? So it was turned internally an assertive, an aggressive kind of censorship that says, I won't just lie to you. I will try to control what you can say, what you can think, etc. And as I said during COVID, whether I agree with what people think or not, whether I think it's right, wrong, etc., whether you agree with what I think or not, we should be able to say it. And many things that were discussed during COVID or that was suppressed at some point during the whole thing, it came out that they were not unreasonable, right? There was a discussion early about what was it? Natural immunity, which was a valid discussion. It's a valid scientific issue, and it was suppressed. You could be deplatformed, blah blah blah, for discussing that. And then later on, when the government felt it was okay to talk about natural immunity, and they had to, the discussion came out. Let people talk. But my point being this: so what we're talking about is, why do people lie? And do they lie because they want to, because they enjoy lying? It's what they do. Or do they lie or tell the truth or something in between to get an outcome, right? So the point being, and out of all of this jumbled foolishness, comes to, the neocons will say whatever they got to say to get what they want. They'll say what they got to say to get what they want. True, false, or indifferent. They will tell the truth. So why do I say that? Bashar al-Assad had a speech a while back, and basically what he said was this: that the leaders of the U.S. empire, I'm paraphrasing, are amoral when it comes to what they want. They will do whatever they got to do. They'll say whatever they got to say, and they will go around the world and use the most fascist, vicious, brutal, treacherous groups that they can in order to get an outcome. Right. And so we see, the connections between the U.S. empire and ISIS over the course of the years. They have to hide it from their population, which is an important part of this discussion. But they are amoral. So they say we're the shining light on the hill. They say, you see the advertisements in the U.S., join the Navy, a force for good. So what they imply is what we're doing is good and right and moral. And not only that, it is our job for the world to stand up for goodness and morality. The whole blinking human rights crusade, right? We're the good guys. That means if you do something bad, you got to hide it from your population. What Assad said, hey, they'll use anything. They got no morale. It's all a lie. Whatever they got to do to get what they want, they'll do it. And what they want has to do with greed and money and stealing natural resources and power and things of that nature. Okay. You can go back to Afghanistan. How did ISIS start? What was the infancy of ISIS? What was the beginning of ISIS? And what was the beginning of Al-Qaeda and these jihadist movements? In Afghanistan, the United States saw the Afghan government, which was a fairly, I'm not going to use the word westernized government, but it was a free country and women could go to university and they could teach or whatever, things they could wear regular clothes, whatever they wanted. But the government was too friendly with Moscow. So the U.S. started materially supporting jihadist and Islamic extremists to destabilize the government to go after Moscow. So they deliberately funded and supported and started the worst people on earth, right, in order to get an outcome, as Bashar al-Assad said, that they wanted. Now, I say all this, let's go back to Canada. One of the things that I've reported on for years and discussed, and a lot of other people have, but that is what happened to the Nazis after World War II. I read a book some years ago. People who know me know I love to read, right? I read a book years ago by a guy named Martin E. Lee called The Beast Reawakens. And there's some things in there that I don't agree with, I will certainly say. But I will say one of the things that Martin E. Lee did in this book was he went over basically what happened to the Nazis after World War II. One of the things that he talks about was the KKK, that initially the Nazis took from the South, from the apartheid, from the KKK. So basically the U.S. Southern particularly, but the U.S. apartheid system was a model for the KKK, which is interesting. I'll tell you why. Because there are a number of Nazis in Ukraine, fascists in Ukraine, who have said they view Israel as a model for what they would like to see as an ethno-state, a state that raises the rights of a particular ethnicity and denies the rights of other ethnicities. Now, in the instance of Israel, it is a particular ethnicity, but in the instance of the Ukrainian fascists, they say, we're the white race, the Aryans, which is interesting because they're Slavs, but we're the Aryans. And they want that kind of an ethnic state, right? So what's interesting is Israel being a branch, an arm of the U.S. empire. It's interesting that the Nazis in world, the Hitlerites, right, the Third Reich would fashion a significant amount of their policies, or the foundation of their policies, off the U.S. empire's apartheid system at that time. And the Ukrainian Nazis fashion their system after a branch of the U.S. empire that has been credibly accused of apartheid today. An interesting, something interesting. But at any rate, so what you know, if you read Operation Paperclip, if you read The American Axis, if you read Martin E. Lee's as I just said, the Beast Reawakens, you find also something interesting about the US. Another tidbit from the Beast Reawakens is, what's interesting is that you still had the people, the bunch of Nazis, they were still fairly well organized and kept that way by the US empire after the World War II. And some of them saw the KKK, you know, during the 50s and 60s, et cetera. They looked at the KKK in the South and they said, hey, man, these guys are great. They're wonderful. We love them. Let's send some emissaries to talk to them. They did. And you will notice what's interesting is the KKK considered themselves a Christian organization, right? A fundamentalist Christian organization. That's the way they view themselves. But during the 50s and 60s, all of a sudden, along with the iconography of a fundamentalist Christian organization, you know, they're the equivalent of ISIS. So they've been referred to as vanilla ISIS. Along with that, people started seeing swastikas and all this Hitler worship and all these things go on. You know, things came full circle. These Nazis that were still around, supported, funded, etc., by the U.S. empire and elements throughout the U.S. empire, then revisited their foundation in the KKK type mentality and said, hey guys, you know, look, you guys are doing the right thing, but you need to sprinkle a little bit of Third Reich spice in. And they started sprinkling the Third Reich spice in, and they started adopting the iconography of the fascist movement from the 1930s in Germany. I say all that to say this, that meanwhile, in the 1950s, and this wasn't touched so much in the Beast Reawakens, but people who have studied this know that the U.S. was in, CIA was in Ukraine, and it was funding, supporting the fascists, the Banderites, etc., in its quest to oppose the Soviet Union. So the U.S. did two things. In Afghanistan, in the Middle East, the U.S. empire funded and supported ISIS, fascists, mad, crazy jihadists and fascists to oppose the Soviet Union, to counter the Soviet Union, and they unleashed a monster on particularly the Muslim people first and foremost, and the African people. So all throughout Africa and the Middle East, there's all of these crazy jihadist fascists running around, but they were founded and supported by the U.S. Meanwhile, the Nazis are still doing their thing in Eastern Europe, and the CIA is funding and supporting them. And add this, and this is where we get to Canada. One of the things that happened after World War II was the U.S., you know, decided, hey, these Nazis, they're anti-Soviet, so we can work with them. Now, you also have to read a book. I always recommend books. You also have to read a book called Conjuring Hitler. And that book details information about the assertion regarding supporting the assertion that the U.S., UK empire funded Hitler and brought him to prominence, and then it backfired on him on them at some point. So there's Conjuring Hitler. These are all books that start to bring these things into focus. But at any rate, so after World War II, what you had was you had Eastern Europe, an area where there was a heavy, you know, a large element of support for the Third Reich, and a number of people in particular nations, Ukraine being one of the worst, where some of the locals aligned ideologically with the invading SS troops, and so much so that they became traitors to their own countries, and they joined the SS, and they worked with, you know, basically killing people from the Slavic people in their own region on behalf of the SS. And they deluded themselves to believe that the SS leaders saw them as Aryans as opposed to the Slavs that they actually were. Concluding the war, quite frankly, I'm sure you understand this, not saying I agree with it, I don't agree with any violence against human beings, but the locals in Eastern Europe seemed poised to hang a lot of these but people that they viewed as Nazi traitors, rather than see them hanged in the same way that the U.S. and the U.S. empire, say, goes into Afghanistan and gets all of these people to work for them, to work with them, to help them go after their people. Oftentimes they're referred to as linguists, translators, etc. And now I could defend those people saying we've created an environment in that country of total and complete poverty, and they're just trying to feed their families. That's an argument to be made, but some of the locals see them as traitors. And if the U.S. empire leaves, a lot of times they could face the repercussions, shall we say, and then the U.S. sometimes gets them out, more often than not leaves them to their untimely demise. If they're Muslims, the U.S. isn't going to be all thrilled about saving their lives anyway. But rather than see a lot of these Nazi war criminals face their comeuppance, shall we say, the U.S. Got them out of there and brought them to oftentimes South America, oftentimes Argentina, places like that, brought them to Canada, brought them to the United States. There's another book that I read. I can't remember the name of it. God, I'll look around. It may be sitting around my house somewhere. But there was another book that talked about that. And basically what it talked about was, I can't remember the name of it. I'll look around, it may be here. It talked about the repercussions of Operation Paperclip. It talked about, it might have been in the Beast Reawakens. I can't recall which book it was in. You get caught up with all of these darn books. But what it talked about was bringing all of these Nazis, Nazi sympathizers, traitors, etc., into the U.S., into the West after World War II had a profound effect on U.S. politics, because these people were now able to hide in U.S. politics, to pretend that they're just, hey, we're just Americans trying to influence what we believe politically, but their legacy, their history was straight out of Nazi Germany. And the U.S. brought them in there, and then they particularly had a significant effect. And, one of the things that was discussed was, the infamous Berlin Front in the Nixon administration, where they had all of these, German people with ties back to, the Third Reich. And you can go on and on. You can go to, Karl Rove. Think about the George W. Bush administration with Rove and Rumsfeld. Nazi. And in fact, Colin Powell used to refer to Rumsfeld as a Nazi. And if you look at the way he thought, it was, pretty fascist, right? So bottom line is, this element of thinking has inculcated itself into the U.S. empire, or one may argue, I would probably more likely argue, that the U.S. empire, the ideologically of empire, forget the U.S. empire, of empire, is aligned with the views of the Third Reich. It is expansionist. It is power hungry. It is violent and quite racist, to be quite frank. The empires tend to view their people, because they have power. We're the empire, so our people are somehow superior to other groups. The nature of empires to see things. Eventually, most of them get there. They're, for one reason or another, they become, ethno-fascist states and organizations. But at any rate, so what happens? You can go, and people know this. A lot of people have studied this recently. You can go around the U.S. and Canada, and you can find, they brought in this Ukrainian diaspora, the Ukrainians that they brought in. They didn't bring in left-wing Ukrainians that were say socialist or communist. They didn't bring in just plain old, what I would call kind of middle of the road, non-ideological Ukrainians who, were just farmers and wanted to come over here to hang out, do something different. They very specifically brought in the people who were the traitors, the Quislings, who were aligned with the Third Reich, and who would be facing prosecution and or persecution and or death for their acts during World War II. They brought them over here. They didn't go to sleep. They didn't disappear. They continued their evil works. And so what do we see? You can go around the U.S. and you can see in various places statues and monuments to Ukrainian fascists, actual fascists such as Stepan Bandera, who were involved in horrific acts of violence against, of course, as you know, against Jews, but they also killed lots of other groups. They killed the Romas, that people know pejoratively as the Gypsies, but the Romas, they know, the gay people, Jehovah's Witnesses, people who had mental illness. There was group after group after group that they just exterminated. They were involved in this. They get there and they end up over here. And so they end up with their own, either they're actually over here physically, or they end up with statues and commemorations. We see like a Christia Freeland. Christia Freeland is one of them. Her father was a Nazi. She ends up over here. What about Newland? Newland's people, where are they? Where's Newland's history in Ukraine? What's interesting is Newland, various other leaders in US and Canada are actually Jewish, but they're fascists. And they're from their roots are from Eastern Europe. I don't know let's just use the words, the genetics. And I don't mean that, I don't mean that in an actual physical genetics way. I mean the history. I don't know how that came about, right? The cultural genetics of how it came about, that you had actually Jewish people from Eastern Europe, a place where there were people who were fascists who wanted to kill Jews, but you had Jewish people come out of there who were also fascists. Now, some people argue they're the Trotskyites who believed in eternal warfare. They were the branch of, there was a branch of the communists who believed in eternal warfare. There's been as in whatever ideology, there's battles throughout the ideology, and there's various strains of the ideology. And there was a strain of communism, socialism in Eastern Europe that was in fact quite fascist, and that believed in just spreading war all over the place and spreading the message through eternal war. And so I suspect that Newland and that crew came out, their cultural, political roots come out of that background. So at any rate, bottom line is this: they're fascists. So now they align with fascists. And let me add this: if you look at Ukraine in recent history, right? After the U.S. overthrew the government in 2014, and all this has to do with Canada. After the U.S. overthrew the government in 2014, they actually brought the fascists in Ukraine, the Azov Battalion, the Right Sector, C-14, all of these other. We only hear about the Azov, but there's a vast a fascist movement in Ukraine. They actually brought them to prominence after 2014. So the people over there, the Azov, the extremists in Ukraine, they're very, very powerful considering their numbers, but they don't get their power from Ukraine or from Ukrainian politics. They get their power from the U.S. empire, from outside. People who say we want minority rule, and that minority is going to be the Ukrainian fascists. Now, what happens? Canada, has a history of fascism, of whether it's killing, building schools to kill indigenous people and murder their kids and all that kind of stuff. That's a very fascist thing to do. Or, of course, bringing the fascists over here and attacking their enemies. That background is there, building monuments to them, etc. That background's there. So what happens? This guy who was a World War II SS soldier was brought to Parliament, and he received Zelensky is there, so they bring this guy, and he fought the Russians during World War II. Well, let us be logical for one moment. He didn't have a lot of options of who he was fighting for. The idea that there was some kind of error or mistake here. If somebody was fighting the Russians during World War II, they had to be, what were they? Were they Japanese? Japanese were in opposition to the Russians. They didn't fight them a lot, but they were in opposition to the Russians. He had to be maybe German or some kind of sympathizer working for the German army. I mean, you could, go to maybe, I don't know, Italy or something like that. But the bottom line is they knew this, that he fought the Russians during World War II and that he was of Ukrainian heritage, which only really left one option. So the idea that they couldn't put together this guy's background is pretty much preposterous. They knew who he was and they brought him in and they didn't really care. It wasn't that they didn't really care. That's a bad way to put it. They supported that and they felt like this, that we've come full circle, that it was kind of like a coming out party for the US empire, an attempted coming out party. They were in the closet. Okay. Historically, we've supported the Nazis. We helped to build and create the Nazi war machine, and it got out of hand. And we had to bring it back in under control. But the Russians, we used the Russians to bring it back under control, which the Russians, they were a threat to the Russians. So the Russians did what they had to do. But we aligned with that ideology. And therefore, hey, we're cool. Bring this dude out. It's all right. I mean, we all know as I put it like this, it may have been a shock to people outside of the inner circle of the US empire. In the inner circle, I include Trudeau, I include Biden, I include the Quislings, governments and traders who are running the governments of Europe, South Korea, Japan, etc. So they knew. And as far as their inside group, it was like, yay, hooray, what do we got? Well, we got this Nazi fighter from World War II. Hooray, yay, bring him in and let's all give him a round of applause and a blah, blah, blah. So they brought him in. I think it didn't dawn on them that everybody else was going to have a problem with that because it was so natural to them. It was like, we all know this is normal. We all know this. Get out of here. Come on. I mean, come on. The cat's out of the bag. We're back at war with Russia. We're putting the band back together. We're bringing in Germany and Japan, and we're going to oppose communism and China and Russia. Woo! We got the band back together. It's 1941 all over again. And this time, see, we used Hitler last time, and he got a little out of hand. But this time, we got Olaf Scholz, and he's just a stupid idiot lapdog. So we'll use this guy, and he'll be a bit more benign. So it won't be so obvious what we're doing, and we won't have to worry about the world shunning us because we'll just keep this thing quiet in Ukraine, and we're in control of everything. We're in control of the censorship, the internet, all that kind of stuff. So we'll be cool. We can use the Nazis this time. We'll be more discreet than we were. That's the thing about Ukraine. They're being more discreet with their arming and support of Nazis this time than they were during World War II. So they're discreet, but they felt like this. Okay, the kind of cat's out of the bag. They felt, I think, also as though the people had accepted it, that the people in the West, right, they didn't have to hide it for them anymore. They're coming out of the closet. They're dancing around and they're saying, look at me. This is who I am. With their black leather on and their, swastikas dangling everywhere and, singing Hitler in springtime, blah, 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 that they're like, we're out, man. And everybody's got to be cool with it. Right. And, it's like this. I remember somebody said to me, Garland, one time, well, what are you, gay or something? And I said, well, no. I said, because if I was gay, I'd just say it. I said, I don't think there's a crime. You know what I mean? If I was, I could care less about somebody's life. You're asking me if I was gay, am I trying to hide gay? If I wasn't, why would I say I'm not? I just say, yeah, I am. Leave me alone. Right? It's not something that I would feel needed to hide in this day and age. Right? That's the way I look at it. If somebody is, I didn't even notice it. I didn't even care about it. It's none of my business. Right? So why should somebody, no more than I'll run out and scream, hey, I'm a proud heterosexual. It's not anybody's business. Right? So to me, there's things you don't have to hide. Yeah, or you are going about your life, right? Okay, here's my point. When it comes to Nazis, they felt like they were back in the days when gay people had to hide being gay, and they were doing that. And I think they felt like now we're fighting the Ruskies again. We brought in Japan, we got China, we got this whole Axis thing going on. People seem to have accepted it in the West. So we'll come out of the closet and we'll dance around and say, here I am. I'm a Nazi lover. And everything will be okay because everybody's already accepted it. However, That wasn't exactly the case. It was their censorship did suppress it. A lot of particularly the liberal class and the neocon class just were like, nah, whatever. You're going against the Ruskies. We'll pretend that there's no Nazis involved. We'll just pretend it. But one of the issues is they ain't just over there. They're not just over in Ukraine. Oh, we're not going to worry about Nazis in Ukraine. They're over there. They're 5,000 miles from us. We can ignore them. No, they're here. And they were brought here and they were nurtured and they were incubated by the US empire and its vassals, including Canada. And they are here. And Canada, when it decided to come out of the closet and scream, here I am, look at me, many of the people who had been pretending, yeah, right. Oh, well, there's not a few Nazis in Ukraine. There's Nazis everywhere. Who cares, right? They came face to face with a reality that they didn't want to come face to face with. And that was, holy crap, this is my government, or this is the government that I have to be pretending is the good guys. And there's a friggin' guy standing there who put bullets in the heads of Jews and gay people and Jehovah's Witnesses and anybody else who polls, you name it, right? Anybody that they viewed as under, not worthy of life. And man, did you see those people in the Canadian Parliament? I have never seen them happier. I haven't seen them happier since they were closing the bank accounts of truckers. They were standing up. I saw Christian Freeland, man. Let me see if I can find it. Christian Freeland, man. The grin on her face. Let's look at Christian Freeland. The level of happiness. I'm gonna find her. Here we go. Look at this. This is Chrystia Freeland, Deputy Prime Minister. Deputy Prime Minister. Looking up, seeing a Nazi. Have you ever seen a person with more joy on their face? She's elated. Just going down from the top of her head to the bottom of her fascist little toes. She's grinning. Look at the smile on her face. That ain't a fake grin. That is not a fake. That is real. She's never been so happy. She has finally gotten to the point. It's like, I've finally gotten there. We had to hide. We had to pretend we weren't who we are. We had to stay in the closet and look out the window. And now, oh my God, we can come out. Here I am. Here's my main man, Hunka. He literally shot Jews in the friggin' head and threw them in a ditch. I love this guy. Look at that look on her face. She just loves this guy. And all throughout the Canadian Parliament, they look at this guy. He's Michael Jordan to them. He's Muhammad Ali to them. He's Elvis Presley to them, right? He's the greatest of all time to them. He represents everything they believe in. And why was he there? Why did they bring this guy there? And why were they excited? And how did these animals, I call them animals, how did they describe them? We've got a guy who killed Russians. He is being celebrated in the halls of power in Canada for murdering a particular ethnic group. Why is he here? Because he murdered a particular ethnic group. We're seeing in the United States, we're seeing Lindsey Graham, we're seeing some of these other neocons say, yeah, they're killing Russians. They're murdering Russians. These are genocidal maniacs. Hey, it's costing us X amount of dollars. And what do you get for it? We get to kill Russians. Kind of sounds like you could change that with killing Jews, killing Jehovah's Witnesses, killing gays, killing all of the groups that the Third Reich killed. We got them here. They killed Russians. Whoa, we love them. They killed Russians. And there's Christopher Freeland. Think about the depravity of those kinds of, we don't talk about the actual depravity, the immorality of those kinds of conversations. To say Let's celebrate this person. Why? Because he murdered people of a particular ethnicity. Now, keep in mind something. They killed Russians, women, but he also killed Poles, but he also killed Ukrainians. But what kind of people did he kill? Women, children, civilians. This, not, hey, this guy fought it out with the opposing military. No, they grabbed villagers, they threw them in a friggin' ravine, and they machine gunned them, and they covered it over with dirt. They beat them to death with axes. They burned them alive. Whatever they could do, it was genocide. And now what we see is our Western leaders literally not countenancing genocide, not countenancing genocide, but actually celebrating genocide. This man's here. Why? What was the foundation? Think about this. We're talking about the fact that this guy was brought in and his background and the past and what he did, and they should have known better. But if you think about it, of course they'd bring him in. What did they bring him in? What did they celebrate? What was his glory? If you brought Michael Jackson and Michael Jordan in, you'd say, hey, we brought Michael Jordan in. Why? He was a great basketball player. What did he do? He dribbled and he made shots and he dunked on people and he played pretty good defense, right? Wow. If you bring Wayne Gretzky in, what do you do? Man, that guy could score some goals and pass and all these things, right? You bring in particular athletes. Pele, God bless his soul. What do you? Oh, the scissors kick, all that. If you brought Pele in, it would be to talk about his exploits on the field of soccer. That's what he did. That's why he's there. Forget about the history. He's there today because he was a great soccer player, and you're celebrating his accomplishment in soccer. Great, Pele. Love Pele. What an awesome dude, right? They brought this guy in today because he was a murderer, because he killed people. So they're celebrating war in a way. Hooray, we've got a warrior here, a Nazi warrior. And what did this warrior do? He killed Russians. What kind of Russians? Little teeny Russians, medium-sized Russians, female Russians. But they also leave out the fact that he killed Ukrainians and Poles. That the people that he worked with were notorious for slaughtering civilians. He was celebrated, and that's the thing about it, specifically celebrated for killing Russians. And they just kind of wink, wink. Well, he killed some other people. Wink, wink. They weren't exactly Russians, but they were Russian, as they say today, right? Russian sympathizers, Russian propagandas, Russian. He's what they would call today, the people that he killed, what they would call today Russian propagandists, Russian simps, Putin lovers, blah, blah, blah. They all remember Sarah Ashton Civillo doing her thing. We're going to find these Russian propagandists and hunt them down and bring them to justice. You think that doesn't align with the mentality in the Canadian Parliament that said, let's bring this hero of ours in who killed Russians? Can you say that about anything else? Hey, let's bring in this group that killed Jews, killed gay people, killed blah, killed. That's what they really did. Let's bring in this guy that killed Russians. Can we talk about the other groups that he killed? We know that. We're just going to try to keep that bit quiet. In other words, he killed Russians, hooray. And the fact that he killed Jews and gays and Romas and this groups and Poles, we'll just kind of overlook that because that's okay with us. As long as he killed Russians, it's fine. When you're killing Russians, if you want to shoot a couple Jews or gay people, Jehovah's Witnesses, maybe mentally ill people, whatever, every now and then, we're going to let that go. That's fine. We can overlook that as long as you kill Russians. That's what we're looking at. That's what we heard from the Canadian Parliament. That's the reality. And these are the people who armed. Think about it. The Canadian government, they're apologizing for celebrating a Nazi, right? There's apologizing for, lovingly jumping up and down to show their love for a Nazi. But meanwhile, they're providing weapons and training to actual Nazis. So which is worse? Putting a guy up who's, probably if you take his shirt off, there's a giant swastika tattooed there. I'm just being facetious. He doesn't have that. He doesn't need a swastika tattoo. That dude did the real thing. And arming people today to kill the Russians. So you're saying what he did was great. It was wonderful when he worked for the Nazis. And today we're trying to carry on the legacy of him and his people. That's all they're doing. But we're trying to be a bit more narrow, but not really, because they're talking about killing Russians. So what they're saying is, like, for instance, Daria Dugina, it was a young woman, just a young woman, right? And they're thrilled. Hey, she got killed, a young Russian woman. These weapons that are coming in, these drones that are coming in, hitting Crimea or slapping into the side of a building somewhere in the financial district of Moscow, they're celebrating them. They're putting civilians at risk. They're celebrating that. War puts civilians at risk. I think we shouldn't have war. I don't like putting any civilians at risk, right? But basically, they're like, hooray, doesn't matter. As long as we're killing Russians, we're good. That's what this is about. See, that's the thing that needs to be discussed is he was brought in. Why? Was he brought in because he had a nice jacket on? Was he brought in because at one time he did something nice and helped a little old lady across the street? No, he's specifically brought there and celebrated because when he was wearing the SS uniform of the Third Reich, he killed Russians, which means they're celebrating the reality. You think about it in a broader sense, they're celebrating the fact that at one point, a bunch of people with Third Reich SS crooked crosses on their uniforms were killing Russians. It's a celebration. This is literally a celebration of an attempted Nazi genocide of Russians to this day. And they'd do it today if the Russians didn't have nukes. They would. If the Russians didn't have nukes, and they'd go to Russia. And I wouldn't want to be Russian if these people got in. And the Russians know it. You think they're stupid? They figured it out a long time ago. They just tried to avoid the conflict that was inevitable. It's like, sheep can't make a deal with Russia, with wolves, because wolves want to eat sheep. I'm not saying the Russians are sheep in a pejorative, in a negative form. I'm simply saying that if you have somebody that wishes to prey on you, you can't make a deal because they see you as their meal. They see you as someone they need to destroy. You ain't making a deal with them. I still remember and it was a really good movie, the first Independence Day. And they capture an alien and they say to the alien, look, man, what can we do? Can we work out a deal? How can we negotiate? What is it that you want us to do? And the alien says, die. At that point, they realize, we can't work out a deal with these people because really they just want to kill us and take out the resources on our planet or whatever it is, right? They want this planet. We're in the way. Their aim is to kill us all and take the planet, right? And the Russians realized when it comes to the Nazis, that was their game plan. And they realize today now that's the game plan of the heavily fascist influenced U.S. empire. And one of the things that's happening with the U.S. empire is one of the reasons it's the level of fascism is being exposed is because things are falling apart and crumbling, because the economic model that it uses, neoliberalism, right? Neoliberalism is unsustainable because it's a self-serving racket for the oligarchs. So that's starting to fall apart. Meanwhile, the people are getting poorer. They're homeless. They're, getting less and less. The United States government could care less about them. The system of elections is outed as being corrupt. The government is corrupt as ever, and people are starting to ask questions, and the internet's there. So now people can go to the internet and we can make videos and discuss it, blah, blah, blah. So out of desperation, the empire is returning to its fascist roots. The roots of the U.S. empire was fascism. People say it was democracy. No, it wasn't. How the hell are you going to have democracy and slavery in the same country? That's when we had slaves. This was a fascist apartheid country. That's the roots of the U.S. empire, like it or not. It may hurt some people's feelings. Oh, well, I'm waving my flag, the free and the brave. The reality is you can't have slavery in a democracy. And so we weren't a democracy. We were an apartheid fascist state. Now, we're an empire, a full-fledged empire. Bad news for those who are waving the red, white, and blue flags. You can't have democracy in an empire. The two things are incompatible. So we don't have democracy today because it's an empire. We also have to accept that there are people who run our empire, who push an ideological strain that is at minimum aligned with the Third Reich. And now they're coming out of the closet. They feel, because of the level of censorship they have, because of the level of power that they believe that they have through having their people in place throughout Western governments, through having the technological advantages they have with these big companies that are able to censor people and influence things. They feel like they've got so much power they can kind of do what they want, and they're coming out of their closet, and they will continue to do that. What they didn't see was that over the course of the years, that the majority of the world, at least outside of the West, outside of the heart of the U.S. empire, still was a little freaked out about the whole Third Reich thing, and that there are people who who still, within the context of their heritage, even including Poland, look back and they remember that they got genocided, and they still have a fear that that could happen again. And so they got freaked out. And so they got outed, and boom, it hits the newspaper, it hits everywhere, and they're like, oh my God, we didn't. Basically, what happened is this is, in fact, a gaffe. This is a gaffe. This is an error. This is a mistake. They thought they could get away with something that they couldn't. They thought they could do something. They thought that the whole fascist ideology had returned to the West so much out in the open, that they could openly and clearly stand up and say, here we are, and that it would be accepted, and it wasn't. And it was as Alexander Mercouris called it, a ghastly debacle. And those of us who are in the alternative media stood up and said, aha, aha, aha. You see what we've been telling you, everybody? They're fascist bastards. And there they sit. Now they're like, oh crap, what do we do? We didn't see this coming. Now what do we do? So that's where we are. I got to get ready to run, everybody, but I did want to talk about it. Someone says that was a calculated gamble, a dumb one, a blind one. That's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying. In V Storm. Exactly. You are 100% correct. It was a calculated gamble. We think we can do it and get away with it. And it's like, oh crap. Oh, how are we going to now? What are they going to say now? He couldn't have been a Nazi because we had a Jewish guy in the room. Right? Remember this? Well, they couldn't be Nazis in Ukraine because the president of Ukraine is Jewish. There couldn't be Nazis in this room because there was a Jewish guy there that was pumping his fist celebrating. We're talking about fascism. Nazi, the term Nazi is a very specific strain of ethno-fascism, very specific, but let's not completely forget, fascism has many ugly faces and forms. All ideologies have various forms. And fascism has come into a particular form. I would argue that neoliberalism is a form of fascism. If you look at when they instituted neoliberalism, they overthrew the government of, was it Argentina? And they, Salvador Allende in 1973. I always forget my country, Chile, whatever the hell. But it was 73. They overthrew that, and what did they put in power when they started? They said, we're going to do neoliberalism. We're going to bring in the Chicago boys, etc. But what did they do? They had to put in power a fascist, Augusto Pinochet, because they couldn't institute neoliberalism without fascism, because it doesn't work out for the masses. It only works out for the oligarchs. They had to go to fascism to institute neoliberalism. And now we're in the same place. We're in a neoliberalism, and neoliberalism ain't working now. And the only thing they can do to protect it is to expand their fascist machinations, because now they have to stop the internal uprisings. And now what we see in Canada is the leaders. How can the let me ask you this. What are Canadian people going to do? The question is this: what would you do if you had an elected representative and you saw some freaking Nazi SS guy wandering around, and this representative was like, oh, hooray, go, whoa? Are the Canadian people just going to vote these same bastards in? I bet they will. I bet in Canada that all of those people, see, the Canadians were, oh, well, yeah, oh my God, I'm so upset. Canadian people will vote these bastards right back into office. If the people in Parliament do it, okay, fine. You can be angry at the people in Parliament, but they got to go. But if the Canadians vote their asses right back into office, then guess what? They are representing accurately the views of the Canadian people. And it is my suspicion that the Canadian people, based on what I saw during COVID, I mean, come on, let's beat the truckers, throw them out, boo, kill the truckers, death to the truckers. Anyone who asks anything about COVID, that guy's a Nazi. Oh, really? He's a Nazi. The guy who's questioning the government and government policies, he's the Nazi. And meanwhile, the person who's standing up giving a rousing grandstand to some freaking SS guy, he's a liberal, loving person who's got rainbow flags and he loves everybody. Rainbow flags? Nazis kill gay people. Where are your rainbow flags? At any rate, thanks a lot, all. I will say this. Let me finish by saying this. Anybody who can, make sure you go to, you can go to PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, Patreon, Cash App, any of those places, and help keep the channel strong. I certainly appreciate it. Additionally, just in case they throw me off YouTube, which could happen, go over to Patreon, go to Rockfin, ROKFIN.com/Garland Nixon. Go over there and sign up as a member. Become a member on Rockfin, simply because if they throw me off YouTube, and it doesn't cost anything to become a member on Rockfin, just so you know, if you want to become a subscriber, you can. It's like $14.99 a month, but you don't have to. You can become a member. It costs nothing. And if they throw me off YouTube for things such as this, you'll be good to go. Thanks a lot, everybody. Keep in touch and share this on all your social media platforms. Peace. I'm out.